My name is Morgan Coleman, and at 35, I thought I knew how to handle my sister Stephanie's dismissive attitude. After 2 years commanding classified operations overseas, I agreed to join her dinner with friends, including her boss. I wore my simple blue dress, hiding the 3-star general beneath. When Stephanie introduced me as her little nobody sister with some office job in the military, I smiled politely. I had no idea this dinner would change everything between us. If you have ever been underestimated by family, hit that subscribe button and share where you are watching from. The validation you are seeking might come when you least expect it. Growing up, Stephanie and I were never the typical sisters. Despite being only 3 years younger, she always seemed to exist in a completely different orbit. While I was the responsible one with my nose buried in history books and military strategy games, Stephanie was the vibrant social butterfly who collected friends like trading cards and knew exactly how to charm our parents. Our childhood home in suburban Massachusetts became the stage for our diverging personalities. I would meticulously plan my school projects weeks in advance, while Stephanie would somehow pull together an award-winning presentation the night before. It wasn't that she wasn't smart, she was brilliant in her own way, but her priorities were different. She thrived on social capital and admiration, whereas I found comfort in structure, achievement, and quiet recognition. Morgan, why can't you try to be more like your sister? Mom would ask when I declined yet another party invitation to study. You need to build connections in life. Dad, a former corporate executive, often sided with Stephanie too. Her business ambitions aligned more closely with his vision than my growing fascination with military service. By high school, the pattern was firmly established. Stephanie was the family star, and I was the serious, dependable background character in her glittering story. College only widened the gap between us. I chose West Point despite my parents' confusion, while Stephanie attended an Ivy League business school, exactly as expected. During family gatherings, her internships at prestigious firms dominated dinner conversation. My military training became a brief footnote, often misunderstood. So you're learning to file papers for the Army? My aunt once asked when I tried explaining my tactical training. Something like that, I had answered, already learning the value of keeping certain information classified, even from family. After graduation, our paths diverged completely. Stephanie rocketed up the corporate ladder at a multinational defense contractor, ironically enough. Meanwhile, I quietly built my military career, moving through ranks faster than even I had anticipated. My aptitude for strategic operations and crisis management caught the attention of senior leadership, and soon I was being assigned to increasingly classified missions. The decision to keep my true rank and accomplishments from my family wasn't made all at once. It began as operational security. Certain details of my work couldn't be shared. But over time, as Stephanie's condescension about my administrative military job grew, I found it easier to let her believe what she wanted. My parents followed her lead, never questioning too deeply about what I actually did. It's probably for the best, my commanding officer had said when I mentioned the situation during a security clearance review. The less specific information about your position that circulates, even among family, the better. So I became very good at deflection. When asked about my work at family gatherings, I'd give vague answers about supporting military operations and quickly turn the conversation back to Stephanie's latest promotion or luxury vacation. It was simpler that way, and honestly, the misconception provided excellent cover. My recent 2-year deployment had been the longest and most complex operation of my career. Leading a multinational task force on a classified intelligence mission had earned me my 3rd star and a level of respect among global military leadership that still felt surreal sometimes. When I returned stateside just 2 weeks ago, I was looking forward to some quiet recovery time before jumping into my new Pentagon position. Then came the call from Stephanie. Morgan, you're back in the country, right? You absolutely have to come to dinner tomorrow night. I'm bringing together some very important people, including my boss. He's a military commander or whatever. So you two might actually have something to talk about for once. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, taking a deep breath. I just got back, Steph. I'm still adjusting to the time difference. Please? It would really help me make the right impression. Commander Phillips is considering me for the Defense Contracts Division. Having my military sister there would look good. There it was the real reason for the invitation. Not to reconnect after my long absence, but to use me as a prop for her career advancement. Still, she was my sister. Fine, I conceded. Text me the details. As I prepared for the dinner the following evening, I deliberately chose a modest navy blue dress rather than anything that might hint at my rank. No military insignia, no service pins. Nothing that would give away the fact that I outranked her boss by at least 1 star, assuming he was the commander I thought he was. I swept my dark hair into a simple bun, applied minimal makeup, and put on my mother's silver necklace, the one tangible connection to my family support, however limited it might be. Driving to the restaurant, I rehearsed bland responses to inevitable questions about my work. Administrative support for overseas operations had become my standard line. It wasn't entirely untrue. I did administer operations, just at the highest possible level. What I hadn't prepared for was how much Stephanie's dismissiveness would still hurt after all these years. I was a 3-star general who had led critical missions that had literally changed geopolitical outcomes, yet around my sister, I still felt like the awkward, overlooked teenager I'd once been. As I pulled up to the valet at Ellington's, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, I took one final moment to center myself. Just get through tonight. I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror. You've navigated hostile territories. You can handle one dinner with your sister. If only I had known how the evening would unfold. Ellington's was every bit as opulent as its reputation suggested. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, casting a warm glow over white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. A pianist played softly in the corner, and waitstaff moved with practiced precision between tables. The maitre d' led me through the dining room with a formal courtesy that made me almost miss the straightforward respect of military interactions. I spotted Stephanie before she saw me. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled. Her designer dress probably cost more than 3 months of my housing allowance, and she was laughing animatedly with a table of equally polished people. For a moment, I felt a pang of something like pride. My little sister had certainly made her mark in her chosen world. Then she looked up and saw me. Morgan, finally. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in my appearance. I see you came straight from work. Nice to see you too, Steph, I replied, leaning in for a brief hug. And no, this is what I chose to wear. She pulled back, her smile tightening. Well, we can go shopping soon. I know where to find clothes that are actually flattering on your athletic build. Before I could respond, she was already turning to introduce me to the table. Everyone, this is my older sister Morgan. She does some kind of office work for the military. I kept my expression neutral as I took in the dinner companions. To Stephanie's right sat a woman with sharp features and a sharper gaze, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my first car. This is Amanda, my colleague from the International Acquisitions team, Stephanie explained. And her husband Brad, a man with the overly confident handshake of someone who thought very highly of himself, nodded. Military, huh? My cousin was in the Marines. Real hero stuff. What do you do again? Administrative support, I replied with the practiced ease of someone who had given this cover story countless times. Morgan pushes papers, Stephanie interjected with a light laugh. Nothing exciting. I met the next guest, Rebecca, another friend of Stephanie's who worked in marketing and immediately started telling me about her company's contract with the Defense Department as if I might be impressed. Finally, Stephanie introduced the man at the far end of the table. And this is Commander James Phillips, my boss. He heads up the Military Liaison Division. I recognized him immediately, though I carefully hid any reaction. Commander Phillips was indeed military, naval intelligence specifically, and while his rank was nothing to scoff at, he was several pay grades below me and had actually been present via video conference for one of my classified briefings last year. I prayed he wouldn't recognize me out of context. "Pleasure to meet you, sir," I said politely, using the proper address a lower-ranking officer would use. He looked at me curiously for a moment, then nodded. "Likewise." "Which branch?" "Army." I replied simply. "She's been doing administrative work overseas," Stephanie cut in. "Nothing classified or important." "Morgan, sit next to Rebecca." I took my assigned seat, feeling the first real sting of the evening. Nothing important? The operation I'd just led had prevented an international crisis that would have directly impacted the very defense contracts Stephanie's company managed. But I smiled and reached for my water glass instead of correcting her. As the waiter took drink orders, the conversation quickly turned to everyone's recent professional accomplishments. Amanda had just closed a major deal with a European client. Brad had apparently purchased some significant property investment. Rebecca was being considered for a director position. And Stephanie, of course, had just been shortlisted for the Defense Division promotion. "Morgan, what about you?" Commander Phillips asked, seemingly genuinely interested. "What have you been working on overseas?" Before I could even formulate my standard vague response, Stephanie jumped in. "Oh, Morgan just does basic administrative work. She helps schedule things and manage paperwork for the real soldiers." She turned to me with a condescending smile. "Though I'm sure it's very important paperwork, right?" The table laughed, and I felt my cheeks warm slightly. 2 weeks ago, I had been coordinating a multinational intelligence operation that saved countless lives. Now I was being treated like an office clerk. "It keeps me busy," I said mildly. "I'm sure it does," Amanda said with the kind of smile that suggested she was humoring me. "It takes all types to keep things running." The waiter returned for our dinner orders. When it came to my turn, I selected the filet mignon, one of the more expensive items on the menu, but something I genuinely enjoyed after 2 years of military rations. Stephanie raised an eyebrow. "Can you even afford this place?" "That's a $70 steak, Morgan." The table fell momentarily silent, the comment too nakedly rude to ignore. "I'm treating tonight," Commander Phillips interjected smoothly, though the awkwardness lingered. "I can cover my meal," I assured him, then turned to Stephanie. "My administrative job pays well enough for the occasional steak." In truth, my general salary was significantly higher than most people realized, and after years of deployment with minimal expenses, my savings account was quite healthy. But Stephanie had always assumed I lived paycheck to paycheck because I didn't flaunt my finances the way she did. "If you say so," she replied with a dismissive wave. Anyway, James was just telling us about the new defense initiative his department is overseeing. Apparently, it's going to revolutionize how companies like ours interface with military needs. And just like that, I was sidelined from the conversation again, as they discussed business matters. I took small sips of my water and wondered how long I needed to stay before making a polite exit. The evening stretched before me like a particularly uncomfortable tactical training exercise, something to be endured rather than enjoyed. Little did I know, the most uncomfortable moments were yet to come. The conversation shifted as our appetizers arrived, moving from corporate achievements to broader topics of world politics and military operations. I picked at my salad as Amanda's husband Brad held forth about the recent conflict in Eastern Europe. "The problem is our military leadership," he declared with the confidence of someone who had never been anywhere near a battlefield. "They're too hesitant, too bureaucratic. If I were running things, we'd have resolved that situation months ago with a show of force." Commander Phillips looked slightly uncomfortable, but remained diplomatic. Military strategy often involves complexities that aren't apparent to outsiders. Exactly, Stephanie jumped in. That's why we need more private sector thinking in defense. Cut through all that red tape. She turned to me with a smirk. Morgan knows all about military bureaucracy, don't you? How many forms do you process a day? I took a slow sip of water, remembering the 16-hour strategy sessions I'd led, the split-second decisions that had determined the success or failure of critical operations, the letters I'd written to families of fallen soldiers. It varies, I replied neutrally. See? Even she can't give a straight answer, Stephanie laughed. Military secrecy about paper clips and staples. Rebecca joined in. My brother was in the Army for 2 years before going into finance. He said most of the time was just waiting around for something to happen. That can certainly be part of the experience, I acknowledged, thinking of the countless hours of preparation that preceded any significant operation. What looked like waiting around to an outside observer was often intensive planning, training, or intelligence analysis. The main courses arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. I cut into my steak, savoring the first bite. After months of military rations, a properly cooked fillet was a luxury worth every penny. So, Morgan, Amanda said, eyeing my plate, that's expensive taste for someone on your salary. Military administration must pay better than I thought. Administrative roles in the military are compensated based on rank and years of service, I explained patiently. Like any other position. She probably put it on credit, Stephanie stage whispered to Amanda. Morgan's never been great with finances. I felt a flash of irritation. That characterization might have been true when I was 20, but I'd managed complex operational budgets for years now. My personal finances were immaculate. Actually, I'm debt-free. I countered, breaking my usual pattern of letting Stephanie's comments slide. Have been for years. Stephanie looked surprised, then dismissive. Well, good for you. I suppose when you have no social life and live in military housing, you can save a few dollars. The conversation moved on, but the pattern continued throughout the meal. Any contribution I made was minimized or dismissed. When I mentioned a country I'd been stationed in, Stephanie interrupted to talk about the luxury resort she'd visited there. When Commander Phillips asked about my perspective on a diplomatic situation, my sister answered for me, assuring him I wouldn't know anything meaningful about it. Morgan's never been politically aware, she explained, as if I weren't sitting right there. She just follows orders. I found myself transported back to countless family dinners where my achievements were footnotes to Stephanie's starring role. A familiar knot formed in my stomach, a mixture of hurt, frustration, and resignation. During a brief lull, Commander Phillips addressed me directly. So, what brought you into military service, Morgan? Family tradition? Before I could answer, Stephanie laughed. God, no. Dad was horrified when she enlisted instead of going into business. I think she just wanted to be different. I enlisted after college. Actually, I corrected. And it was West Point. Not basic enlistment. The table fell silent for a moment. West Point. Commander Phillips looked genuinely surprised. That's impressive. Stephanie waved dismissively. She's being modest. It was a special program for administrative tracks. Right, Morgan. It wasn't. I'd graduated near the top of my class in standard officer training. But I'd long ago stopped correcting Stephanie's fictitious versions of my life. It was a while ago now, I said instead. The conversation soon turned to a recent covert military operation that had made brief headlines before disappearing from the news cycle. It happened to be the very operation I had commanded, though the public knew almost nothing about the actual details. Total disaster, Brad proclaimed. Whoever was in charge should be court-martialed. My hand tightened around my water glass. The operation had actually been a remarkable success, achieving all primary objectives with minimal casualties. The disaster narrative had been deliberately cultivated to conceal the true nature and achievements of the mission. I read they sent in some female general to clean up the mess afterward. Amanda added, "Can you imagine? What would a woman know about that kind of tactical situation?" I excused myself to the restroom before I could say something classified or worse. Something that would reveal exactly what this particular woman knew about that tactical situation. In the elegant privacy of the restroom, I leaned against the marble counter and took several deep breaths. I'd faced hostile forces, navigated international diplomatic crises, and commanded troops in life-or-death situations. Yet somehow my sister still had the power to make me feel small. 10 more minutes, I told my reflection. Make an excuse about an early morning, then leave. I straightened my dress, reapplied my lipstick, and prepared to return to battle, albeit a very different kind than I was trained for. As I walked back toward the table, I noticed Commander Phillips studying me with an increasingly puzzled expression. Something in his gaze made me uneasy. Recognition was beginning to dawn, and I wasn't sure I was prepared for what would happen next. As I settled back into my seat, I noticed Commander Phillips was still watching me with that same puzzled expression. He tilted his head slightly, as if trying to place me in a different context. "Have we met before, Morgan?" he asked suddenly during a lull in conversation. "You seem familiar." My heart rate accelerated slightly. "I don't believe so, sir. Perhaps at a military function." Possibly," he replied, though he didn't look convinced. Stephanie rolled her eyes. "Trust me, James, if you'd met Morgan before, you wouldn't remember. She tends to blend into the background." I saw something change in Commander Phillips' expression, a flash of discomfort at Stephanie's dismissiveness. Before he could respond, the conversation was hijacked by Brad launching into his thoughts on the Defense Department's budget allocation. "They waste millions on outdated protocols," he proclaimed. "If they consulted with business experts like us, they could streamline everything." I bit my tongue, thinking of the countless efficiency reviews and optimization protocols I'd implemented in my command. The military wasn't perfect, but it wasn't the bureaucratic dinosaur civilians often imagined. "What do you think, Morgan?" Commander Phillips asked, deliberately bringing me back into the conversation. "From your perspective in administration, do you see areas where efficiency could be improved?" It was a thoughtful question, giving me an opportunity to contribute without revealing my actual role. I was formulating a carefully neutral response when a restaurant staff member approached our table. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "Is there a Morgan Coleman present?" "There's an urgent call for you at the front desk." Stephanie frowned. "Who would be calling you here? Nobody even knows you're in town." "Excuse me," I said, rising from my seat. "I should take this." As I followed the staff member to the front, I could feel Commander Phillips' eyes on me. The pieces were starting to come together for him, and I knew my careful separation of personal and professional lives was in jeopardy. At the front desk, I took the receiver, immediately recognizing the voice of my aide, Lieutenant Winters. "General Coleman, I apologize for tracking you down at dinner," she said crisply. "But we have a situation developing with Operation Cornerstone. The Secretary is requesting your presence for an emergency briefing." "Understood. Timeline?" "As soon as possible, ma'am. Transport is already en route to your location." "I'll be ready." "Thank you, Lieutenant." I handed the receiver back to the receptionist and took a moment to compose myself. The operation in question was sensitive, a continuation of the work I'd been doing overseas. If the Secretary was calling an emergency briefing, the situation was serious. As I walked back to the table, I was already mentally shifting from sister to general, organizing the questions I'd need answered and the resources I'd need to mobilize. "I'm sorry," I announced as I reached the table. "I need to leave. Something's come up." "Seriously?" Stephanie's voice dripped with annoyance. "What could possibly be so urgent about paperwork that you have to leave during dinner?" Before I could respond, Commander Phillips stood suddenly, his eyes wide with recognition. General Coleman, he said, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. General Morgan Coleman. The table fell silent. Stephanie, who had been taking a sip of water, choked slightly. Yes, Commander, I replied quietly, seeing no point in denying it now. He immediately straightened his posture, almost standing at attention. I apologize for not recognizing you immediately, ma'am. It's an honor to meet you in person. I was on the video conference for your briefing on the raisin situation last year. I remember, Commander. You asked some insightful questions about regional implications. Stephanie was staring at us, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and shock. What are you talking about? Morgan's an administrative assistant. Commander Phillips turned to her with a mixture of surprise and embarrassment on her behalf. Miss Coleman, your sister is General Morgan Coleman. 3-star general and, until recently, commander of the Joint Special Operations Task Force in the Eastern Mediterranean. She's one of the most respected strategic minds in the military. That's impossible, Stephanie whispered, but her certainty was crumbling. Welcome back stateside, General, Commander Phillips continued formally. Your usual briefing is scheduled for tomorrow at 0800, I believe. That's correct, Commander, I confirmed, watching as Stephanie's water glass slipped from her fingers, splashing onto the pristine tablecloth. Amanda and Rebecca were staring with undisguised shock. Brad looked like he'd swallowed his tongue, no doubt mentally reviewing his earlier comments about military leadership. I didn't realize, he stammered. There's been some kind of mistake, Stephanie insisted, finding her voice. My sister works in administration. She's not. She can't be. I assure you, there's no mistake, Commander Phillips said firmly. General Coleman is quite well known within military circles, though much of her work is classified. He turned back to me. The call you received just now, General, is there a situation developing? I nodded, grateful for his professional understanding. Yes, I'm needed at headquarters. If you'll all excuse me. Of course, ma'am, he replied. Then, surprising me, he added, I'm heading that direction myself. Would you like a ride? It might be faster than waiting for a car. That would be appreciated, Commander. Stephanie was still staring, her mouth slightly open. Morgan, what is happening right now? For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to stand with the full authority of my rank. Not arrogantly, but with the quiet confidence that came from years of command. I'm sorry I couldn't be more forthcoming about my position, Stephanie. Much of my work is classified, as Commander Phillips mentioned. I need to go now, but perhaps we can talk tomorrow. I placed money on the table to cover my meal and a generous tip. Dinner was lovely. Thank you all for your company. As Commander Phillips and I turned to leave, I heard Rebecca whisper loudly to Amanda, Did she just say 3-star general? The last thing I saw as we exited the restaurant was Stephanie's face, a complex mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been the beginning of realization. The evening had certainly not gone as planned, but then again, I was well accustomed to adapting to unexpected developments in the field. This particular operation, dinner with my sister, had just concluded with an unanticipated tactical revelation. Commander Phillips and I walked in silence to the valet stand. As we waited for his car, he cleared his throat awkwardly. General, I feel I should apologize for not recognizing you immediately. I shook my head. No apology necessary, Commander. Out of context, in civilian clothes, it's perfectly understandable. Still, he continued, the way your sister was. I mean, I had no idea she didn't know your actual position. Few people in my personal life do, I explained. Operational security became a habit and then a way of life. The valet pulled up with his car, a sensible black sedan. Once we were inside and moving toward headquarters, Phillips spoke again. If you don't mind my asking, ma'am, how does a 3-star general end up being characterized as an administrative assistant by her own family? I gazed out the window at the passing city lights, considering how to answer. It started with necessary discretion about classified operations. Over time, it became easier to let my sister believe what she wanted about my career. Stephanie has always needed to shine the brightest. He nodded, seeming to understand the family dynamic from our brief dinner interaction. Well, for what it's worth, your reputation shines pretty brightly in military circles. Your strategy during the Raisin operation was taught as a case study at the War College last semester. I allowed myself a small smile at that. Thank you, Commander. Though I suspect that information won't make family gatherings any less complicated. Probably not, he agreed with a chuckle. When we arrived at headquarters, the building was illuminated despite the late hour, a sure sign of the developing situation. Lieutenant Winters was waiting at the entrance, tablet in hand. General Coleman, she greeted me, handing me my uniform jacket. She had obviously retrieved it from my office, anticipating I would need to transition quickly from civilian to military appearance. The secretary is waiting in the secure conference room. Intelligence reports came in 20 minutes ago. Thank you, Lieutenant. I slipped the jacket on over my dress, not standard protocol, but it would establish my authority for the emergency briefing. I turned to Commander Phillips. Thank you for the ride, Commander. My pleasure, General. And if I may say, it was an honor to finally meet you in person. I nodded, already mentally transitioning to the task at hand. Likewise, Commander. I'll see you at tomorrow's scheduled briefing. As he departed, Lieutenant Winters guided me toward the conference room, quietly updating me on the situation. I focused completely on the emerging crisis, setting aside the personal drama of dinner. Years of military training had taught me to compartmentalize effectively. The emergency briefing lasted 3 hours. By the time we had stabilized the situation and I had given the necessary orders, it was well past midnight. My phone showed 7 missed calls and 12 text messages from Stephanie, ranging from confused to angry to demanding explanations. I texted back a simple response. On duty. We'll call tomorrow. When I finally arrived home at nearly 2 in the morning, I was exhausted but strangely energized. The bubble of secrecy I had maintained for years had finally burst. Whatever happened next with Stephanie, at least I would no longer need to diminish myself in her presence. The next morning, after 4 hours of sleep and another early briefing, I returned to my apartment to find Stephanie waiting in the hallway. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, as if she dressed hastily, and her expression was a storm of emotions. How long have you been waiting? I asked, unlocking my door. An hour, she replied, following me inside without invitation. Where have you been? I've been calling all night. Working, I said simply, setting down my briefcase. There was a situation that required my attention. Stephanie paced my living room, gesturing wildly. A situation? Morgan, what the hell is going on? James Phillips spent the rest of dinner telling everyone about your decorated military career. He said you've led classified operations, that you advise the Joint Chiefs. She stopped abruptly, staring at me. Is it true? Are you actually a general? I met her gaze steadily. Yes, Stephanie. I'm a lieutenant general in the United States Army. 3 stars. But that's impossible. You would have told me. You would have told Mom and Dad. Would I? I asked quietly. When have any of you ever shown interest in my military career beyond assuming it was some minor administrative role? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. You never corrected us. You never asked, I countered. You decided what my life was and never questioned your assumptions. Do you have any idea how many times you've interrupted me at family gatherings to explain my own job to me incorrectly? I didn't know. You didn't want to know, Stephanie. It was easier to believe your older sister was some insignificant paper pusher because it fit the narrative you've built your entire life, that you're the successful one, the star, the one who matters. Her face crumpled slightly. That's not true, isn't it? Last night you asked if I could afford a $70 steak in front of your boss and friends. Who does that to someone they respect? Stephanie sank onto my couch, her anger giving way to confusion. I just don't understand why you would hide something like this. Being a general is impressive. Why wouldn't you tell us? I sighed, the weight of years of maintaining this separation suddenly heavy. It started as operational security. The work I do is classified. The fewer people who know my position, the safer certain operations are. But over time, I paused, organizing my thoughts. Over time, it became easier to let you all believe what you wanted. You had your narrative about me, and correcting it would have meant confrontation. So you've been lying to us for years? I've been omitting details, I corrected. I never lied about being in the military. I just didn't specify my rank or role. Stephanie stared at her hands. Do Mom and Dad know? No. They believe what you've told them, that I do some kind of administrative work. God, Morgan. She looked up, eyes glistening. Do you know how humiliated I was last night? James spent 20 minutes telling everyone at the table about your accomplishments after you left. Things I should have known about my own sister. I'm sorry you were embarrassed. I said honestly. That wasn't my intention. You made me look like a fool in front of my boss. And there was the real issue. Not that she'd learned something surprising about her sister, but how it affected her image. Stephanie, I said carefully, I've spent years diminishing myself around you to protect your ego. Last night wasn't my doing. If Commander Phillips recognized me, that's just reality asserting itself. That's not fair, she protested, but with less conviction. Isn't it? Tell me honestly, if you had known I was a 3-star general, would you have treated me the same way? Would you have invited me to dinner just to have a military connection to impress your boss? Would you have interrupted me, spoken for me, or asked if I could afford my meal? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The truth is, I continued more gently, you've needed me to be less than I am for a very long time. And I've allowed it because it seemed easier than confrontation. But I'm tired, Stephanie. I'm tired of pretending to be smaller than I am when I'm with my family. Tears spilled down her cheeks. It's not that I need you to be less, she whispered. It's that if you're this, then what am I? The raw honesty of her question caught me off guard. For the first time, I glimpsed the insecurity beneath her polished exterior. You're my sister, I said simply. You're successful in your own right. You don't need to tear me down to shine. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking slightly. After a moment, she looked up, mascara smudged. I've been awful to you, haven't I? We've both contributed to this dynamic. I acknowledged. But yes, sometimes you've been pretty awful. A surprised laugh escaped her. God, Morgan. A general. I still can't believe it. She paused. Does this mean you outranked James? By quite a bit, yes. He saluted you when you left the restaurant. She shook her head in wonder. My big sister, the general. It wasn't a resolution. Not by a long shot. Years of established patterns wouldn't change overnight. But it was a beginning, the first honest conversation we'd had in longer than I could remember. My phone buzzed with a message from headquarters. I need to get back to work, I said, standing. Stephanie nodded, wiping her eyes. Of course you do. Important general business. There was no mockery in her tone now, only a slight awkwardness as she adjusted to this new reality. Can we talk again soon? When you're not saving the world or whatever it is you actually do. I'd like that, I replied. And Stephanie? Next time you have questions about my life, just ask me directly. No more assumptions. Deal, she agreed, heading toward the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I don't understand what you do yet, but I'm proud. After she left, I stood in my silent apartment, absorbing the seismic shift that had just occurred in our relationship. Years of carefully maintained separation between my personal and professional lives had collapsed in a single evening. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in years, I felt like my sister had actually seen me, the real me, not the diminished version I presented at family gatherings. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. My phone buzzed again. Duty called, as it always did. But something had fundamentally changed. I was no longer General Coleman at work and Stephanie's nobody sister at home. I was finally, simply Morgan, in all contexts. And that felt like a victory more meaningful than any military campaign I had ever led. The following weeks brought a strange new reality. At headquarters, everything continued as normal: briefings, strategy sessions, the daily business of military leadership. But in my personal life, the ground had shifted dramatically. Stephanie called regularly, asking questions about my career that she'd never bothered with before. Some I could answer, others were classified. She seemed to be making a genuine effort to understand my world, though I could tell she was still processing the revelation. So when you said you were deployed overseas last year, you were actually commanding an entire operation? She asked during one of our phone calls. That's correct. And all those times you couldn't make it to family events because of work commitments. Those were actual commitments. Stephanie, running military operations doesn't typically accommodate family dinner schedules. She laughed a little. I always thought you were just avoiding us. Sometimes I was, I admitted. But mostly I was doing my job. 3 weeks after the fateful dinner, I received an unexpected call from my parents. Stephanie had finally told them the truth about my position. They wanted to meet for lunch. I chose a quiet cafe near my apartment, arriving early to secure a private table in the corner. When they walked in, I was struck by how much older they looked than in my memory. Dad's hair had gone completely silver and Mom moved more carefully than I remembered. Morgan, Mom said, embracing me tightly. My little general. Hi, Mom, I replied, returning her hug. Hi, Dad. He stood awkwardly for a moment before giving me a quick, stiff hug. Morgan. Once we were seated and had ordered, an uncomfortable silence fell. Mom broke it first. Stephanie told us everything. Why didn't you tell us about your promotions, your real position? I took a sip of water, considering my answer carefully. Initially, it was operational security. Later, it just seemed easier not to correct the assumptions you'd all made. Assumptions? Dad's voice had an edge. You deliberately misled us about your career. Did I? When did any of you ever ask me detailed questions about what I actually do? You decided I had some minor role and never questioned it. We're your parents, Mom protested. You should have told us. Like you told Aunt Susan when Dad got passed over for that VP position. I countered. Or like you told the neighbors when Stephanie dropped out of her MBA program for 6 months. Our family has always had a selective relationship with uncomfortable truths. Dad flinched. That's different. Is it? You taught us both that image matters more than reality. Stephanie embraced that lesson. I just found a different way to apply it. Mom reached across the table to take my hand. Morgan, honey, we're proud of you. Of course we are. We just don't understand why you kept this from us for so long. I softened slightly at her touch. Do you remember what you said when I told you I was going to West Point instead of business school? Dad shifted uncomfortably. That was years ago. You said I was wasting my potential. That I'd end up a nobody taking orders from men with half my intelligence. I was worried about you, he defended. The military isn't always kind to women. You weren't worried, Dad. You were disappointed. And every time I came home after that, you and Mom would listen to Stephanie talk about her career for hours, then ask me maybe one polite question about mine before changing the subject. That's not true, Mom began. But Dad interrupted her. No, she's right. He looked at me directly. I didn't understand your choice, and I didn't try to. It was easier to focus on Stephanie because her path made sense to me. He paused. I was wrong. His admission surprised me. My father rarely acknowledged mistakes. 3 stars, he continued, shaking his head slightly. My daughter, a 3-star general. Do you know how remarkable that is? I'm aware of the statistics, I replied dryly. No, I mean. He struggled for words. I'm trying to say I'm proud of you, Morgan. I should have said it years ago. The simple words hit me with unexpected force. How long had I waited to hear them? Thank you, I said quietly. Will you tell us about your work now? Mom asked. Whatever you can share. So I did. I explained the basic structure of my command, the general regions I'd worked in, the types of operations I oversaw, all carefully edited to exclude classified information. They listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed they were trying to understand this world that had been invisible to them for so long. As lunch progressed, the conversation became more natural. For the first time in years, I felt like I was speaking to my parents as my whole self, not the diminished version I usually presented at family gatherings. When we parted, Mom hugged me tightly again. We love you, sweetheart. All of you, not just the parts we understood. Dad's hug was longer this time, less awkward. I was wrong about the military, he said gruffly. You found exactly where you belong. I watched them walk away, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Decades of family dynamics wouldn't be resolved in a single lunch, but it was a beginning. That evening, Stephanie came over with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Peace offering, she explained, holding up the bottle. I figured we could both use a drink after the parental inquisition. I smiled, letting her in. They called you too. 3 times since lunch. She kicked off her shoes and curled up on my couch with practiced familiarity. Dad actually asked me for details about your career. I think you broke him. I laughed, opening the wine. I simply existed as myself. If that breaks him, that's on him. She accepted a glass, her expression turning serious. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About needing me to be less than you are. I sat across from her, waiting. You were right, she admitted. I've built so much of my identity around being the successful one, the star. Finding out you've been this whole other person, this important, powerful person, while I was dismissing you. She shook her head. It made me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship. And I've been a self-centered jerk, she said bluntly. For years. Decades, probably. I couldn't help but smile. Well, I wouldn't argue with that assessment. She threw a pillow at me, and for a moment, we were kids again. Before competition and comparison had complicated everything. The thing is, she continued more seriously, I don't know how to be your sister without being like that. We've been in these roles for so long. We figure it out together, I suggested. Day by day. No more hiding who I am, no more needing to diminish me to elevate yourself. Deal. She raised her glass. To my badass general sister, who apparently has been quietly saving the world while I've been bragging about corporate acquisitions. I clinked my glass against hers. And to my sister who finally sees me. We talked late into the night, filling in gaps in each other's lives that years of surface-level interaction had created. It wasn't perfect, old habits emerged occasionally, requiring gentle correction. But it was real in a way our relationship hadn't been since childhood. As Stephanie was leaving, she paused at the door. You know what's funny? James Phillips asked me to coffee yesterday. Oh! Yeah. He said he wanted to discuss my proposal for the Defense Contracts Division. She grinned. I think he's trying to get intel on you. Apparently, my nobody sister is quite the celebrity in military circles. Hardly a celebrity, I protested. Not what James says. She winked. Don't worry, I'll be sure to tell him all your embarrassing childhood stories. Can't have him thinking you're too perfect. I groaned. Please don't. Too late. Already planning it. Her smile softened. But I'll also make sure he knows how proud I am to be your sister. Because I am, Morgan. Really proud. After she left, I stood in my apartment, feeling lighter than I had in years. The careful compartmentalization I had maintained between my professional and personal lives had collapsed, and somehow the world hadn't ended. Instead, something new and more authentic was emerging from the ruins. Commander Phillips had recognized me at that dinner, but in a more important way. My family was finally beginning to recognize me too, not just my rank or achievements, but me, Morgan Coleman, exactly as I was. 1 month after the revelation at Ellington's, I found myself sitting across from Stephanie at our favorite coffee shop, a small place equidistant between my apartment and hers. We had made it a weekly tradition, carving out time for each other amid our busy schedules. This small act of intentional connection represented the new foundation we were building, one of mutual respect rather than competition. "So," Stephanie said, stirring her latte, "how was the Pentagon briefing yesterday?" "About what you'd expect," I replied. "A lot of serious people looking at serious maps, making serious decisions." She laughed. "You know, a part of me is still trying to reconcile my big sister with this 3-star general everyone keeps telling me about." She shook her head. "James practically genuflects when I mention your name." "He does not," I protested. Though Commander Phillips had indeed been almost comically formal in our professional interactions since that dinner. "He absolutely does. Last week he rescheduled an executive meeting because it conflicted with the briefing you were giving. Said, and I quote, 'One doesn't keep General Coleman waiting.'" I rolled my eyes, but couldn't help feeling a small glow of satisfaction. After years of being underestimated, having my authority acknowledged, even over-acknowledged, was a novel experience. "How are things with Mom and Dad?" Stephanie asked, changing the subject. "They've been unusually quiet with me lately." "We're finding our way," I said carefully. "Dad called yesterday to ask about a military strategy article he read. I think he's trying to understand my world." "That's progress." "It is," I agreed. "Small steps, but genuine ones." The transformation in my family relationships over the past month had been remarkable, if imperfect. There were still awkward moments, old patterns that emerged unconsciously. But there was also a new willingness to see each other more completely. "I introduced you to Caroline from marketing last week," Stephanie said, contemplating her coffee. "Do you know what I said?" I raised an eyebrow, curious. "I said, 'This is my sister, Lieutenant General Morgan Coleman.' Not my sister who works for the military or any of the diminishing crap I used to say." She looked up at me. Her jaw literally dropped. "It felt good, Morgan. It felt really good to see someone else recognize how exceptional you are." "I'm just doing my job, Steph." "No, you're not just doing anything," she countered. "That's what I've been realizing. I spent so many years needing to be the special one that I couldn't see how extraordinary you actually are." Her words touched me deeply. "You're pretty extraordinary yourself, you know. Just in different ways." She smiled, a genuine smile without the competitive edge I'd grown accustomed to seeing. "We both are. The Coleman sisters, taking over the world in our respective domains." As we continued talking, I marveled at how much had changed. The weight of maintaining separate identities, General Coleman and Morgan the underachieving sister, had been exhausting in ways I hadn't fully recognized until the burden was lifted. My new Pentagon position had turned out to be a blessing in disguise. With a more public-facing role coordinating international defense cooperation, I could share more of my professional life with my family without compromising security. It created natural bridges between my worlds that had previously been rigidly separated. Commander Phillips had indeed become an unexpected ally. After our shared experience at Ellington's, he'd made a point of checking in occasionally. Understanding the unique challenge of balancing high-level military responsibility with civilian relationships. "I saw James yesterday," Stephanie mentioned casually. "He asked about you." "Professionally or personally?" I asked, curious. "A bit of both," she said with a sly smile. "I think he might be interested in knowing you beyond the briefing room." I felt a flush of surprise. That would be complicated. Life is complicated, she shrugged. Doesn't mean it's not worth exploring. 2 weeks later, our parents hosted a family dinner, the first since the revelation of my actual rank and position. I arrived in civilian clothes, but made no effort to downplay my military bearing or accomplishments when the conversation turned to work. Morgan was just telling us about her new initiative with NATO, Mom said proudly to our aunt, who was visiting from Chicago. Isn't that fascinating, Susan? Dad actually asked informed questions about military strategy, having clearly done some reading on the subject. Stephanie chimed in with relevant points about defense contracting, creating connections between our separate professional spheres. It wasn't perfect. Old habits emerged occasionally. Mom still interrupted me once or twice. Dad still gave Stephanie's corporate achievements slightly more attention. But there was a conscious effort being made, an awareness that hadn't existed before. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside in his study, a room I'd rarely been invited into as a child. I have something for you, he said, opening his desk drawer. He pulled out a small box and handed it to me. Inside was a silver star pin, not a military insignia, but a simple, elegant piece of jewelry. I know you can't wear your actual stars most of the time, he said awkwardly. But I thought you should have something to remind you that your family sees you now. All of you. I was momentarily speechless, touched by the gesture from my usually reserved father. Thank you, I said finally, closing my hand around the pin. This means a lot to me. He nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional moment, but determined to see it through. I was wrong, Morgan. About the military, about your choices. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. It's okay, Dad. We got here eventually. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past month. The accidental revelation at a dinner that was supposed to be just another exercise in being diminished had instead catalyzed profound change. I no longer had to compartmentalize my life, pretending to be less in one sphere to maintain peace in another. The energy I had spent maintaining that separation could now be directed toward building authentic connections with my family. There was something powerful in being fully seen and accepted, not just for my rank or achievements, but for who I was at my core. The validation I had unconsciously sought from my family for years had finally come, not through their acknowledgement of my stars, but through their willingness to see the person beneath them. As I parked outside my apartment building, my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. Dinner next Friday? James asked if you might join us. No pretenses this time, I promise. I smiled. Typing back, I'd like that. The stars on my uniform had never defined me, but they had become part of who I was, just as being Stephanie's sister, John and Martha's daughter, and now, perhaps, someone who might explore a connection with James Phillips beyond professional courtesy. For years, I had been the general who commanded troops and the sister who diminished herself. Now, finally, I could simply be Morgan, complex, accomplished, still growing, and fully seen. In the military, we often talk about mission objectives and strategic outcomes. But sometimes the most important victories are personal ones, the courage to stand in your truth, the strength to maintain your dignity when others would diminish you, and the wisdom to recognize when the battle is finally, blessedly, over. My sister had called me a nobody at dinner. But in that moment of revelation, when my worlds collided and my full self was finally exposed, I had never felt more completely somebody. Not just General Coleman, not just Morgan the sister, but wholly and authentically myself. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about a time when you were finally recognized for your true worth after being underestimated. Has your family ever discovered something surprising about you that changed how they see you? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey of recognition and healing, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of personal triumph. Remember, Sometimes the people who know us the least are the ones closest to us, until truth creates a bridge to genuine understanding. Thank you for listening, and I hope to connect with you again soon.